although I'm going to talk you through what I know and what my learnings have been in campaigns about how marketing can support shifting behaviour to become more sustainable, I'm 100% sure, just from the introduction of Dave, Louise and Zach alone, that you guys also have great learnings from within your areas of the right tools that we can use to support people to shift their behaviour. So I'm only going to talk for about 20 minutes, and Anna is going to keep me 100% within that window so I don't get too carried away. And then I'm really looking forward to just having a discussion about what you guys are working on, what you are seeing, what you think, because it's a very, very broad topic. But as Anna said, I'm founder of a strategic consultancy called Halo by Design. It's a new entity for me. I set it up 8 months ago, so I'm very early on working in this way. The focus is very much on how do we support our clients and meet their sustainability strategies and goals through shifting behavior. So we engage with clients once they work out what it is that they need to do, but they don't know how to get people to do it. So to add a bit of a meat to the bone on that, things I'm working on at the moment, one is very much around employee engagement, and it's about shifting digital behavior. So getting people to reduce their carbon footprint when it comes to how they behave from a digital point of view, some of which might link to charging, but there's quite a lot that is linked to usage as well. Every email that we send, every web page that we browse, all of that good stuff. So that's the employee end of the spectrum. As you can see, very real world behaviors, but it's about like, how can we create the right strategies and right experiences to shift behavior in that way? So I think, how did I end up doing this? So I've got sort of 20+ years experience in digital strategy, as Anna said, working for strategic consultancies, but also marketing. I was at WPP for a long time, mobile startup, and then more lately at Infosys, which is a very large IT tech integration giant. And I was involved in setting strategies, mainly using digital to shift behavior. Some of that behavior was to do with consumption, so buy more stuff, but increasingly it became focused more on kind of employees. How can we shift their behavior and get them to adopt different platforms? Or how do we get them to collaborate better with their co-workers? And I was lucky enough to lead mobile strategy for Unilever at a global level for 5 years. So right at the beginning of the sustainable living plan journey that they took, I was sort of sitting in the middle of like, how do we actually meet some of the fairly ambitious goals that various different brands have around letting kids get dirty, around dirt is good, around getting kids to wash their hands on key occasions and brush their teeth day and night. So I was bitten by the sustainability bug very much at that point. And then at Infosys, I was lucky enough, as the role I had there was head of strategy, to develop our sustainability proposition, which I loved. And but I had a management role, so I couldn't dedicate all my time to it. So then I left and I set up Halo by Design. So that's a quick intro to me. To take a massive step back, and I think the lens that we at Halo by Design are mainly asked to look at our work through is the climate lens. So if we take a massive step back and we go, right, can people really make a difference? And I think at a very macro level where we are is we're around about 5 tons of CO2 per UK citizen per person as our carbon footprint. And according to Chris Skidmore, we need to drop that to about 2.1 tons. And in his net zero review, he very firmly pointed the finger at the UK citizens, that about 50% of what we need to achieve means that people are going to have to change the way that they're behaving. And he also called out that there had been no form of public campaign around this space for over 10 years. And therefore, a priority for him very much was about like, how do we engage and enable people, give them the right information, but also enable them to shift their behavior to meet these goals. So we are a big part of the solution. We are also a big part of the problem. But I think we all know that, and that's why we're here. So I'm not going to labor that point too much. So the next thing is, do consumers know about this? Do they know that they have a role to play, and are they keen to engage? And the answer is they do know they have a role. Most surveys show that consumers know that their government has a role, companies have a role, but also they have a role. They know that they need to change. in 50% of cases, they are making minor amendments as they go, and they often have an intention to take more changes, but they don't know what to do. Like, it's big, it's complicated. And quite often the things that are most salient are not actually the things that will have the biggest impact on their carbon footprint. A great example of that is the focus on plastic versus the focus on bigger things, which will have a more dramatic impact. Some of the things that Zach, you mentioned about where do you hold your money, or things around food, or things around transport, these kind of areas. There's a confusion about where do I go? What decisions should I make? And they are asking for help. A recent survey by Forbes said that 88% of consumers really want brands to help them do the right thing. So we have an engaged group of people who are saying that they want to do the right thing, and they are asking for help, and they are starting to shift in minor ways that they understand in that directions. So then the question comes, why should brands help? Like, why should marketing play a role here? Isn't this the job for the environment, and the government, or someone else who should be doing like a more macro cross-category level kind of approach? Because fundamentally, there are a lot of cross-category problems to do with food waste, etc., which could be solved by the government. And I think the reality is that that momentum is definitely not growing. I think we can all say quite clearly that what we are not seeing is more support and more strategy and more focus in this area coming from government. And I think the other thing to say is that there is a definite benefit, because quite often, as you can imagine, when I'm talking to clients about this type of work and fighting the good fight to get the budget, that it comes back to what are the business benefits. So, there are 4. I think the first one is very much status quo at a macro level is not sustainable. If the planet continues to heat, the systems that businesses depend on to make and sell their products are going to be massively disrupted. And that's going to have a huge impact on their core business. So at a fundamental level, status quo is not sustainable. And most clients are beginning to put in place a sustainability strategy. They vary dramatically in terms of the degree of impact that strategy might have, but they are starting to put in place that strategy. So what we do when we engage and support consumers or partners or employees in shifting their behavior is we support that sustainability strategy, and we make a shift away from status quo. The other thing is greenwashing. So we hear and see a lot about greenwashing. In fact, there's now greenwashing and greenhushing, which is when people are so worried about greenwashing that they don't say anything at all. But, greenwashing is one thing, telling people that you're doing something. And we see a lot of that with brands who put their sustainability strategies on their website in a silo over here and say, we're doing all of these things, but they don't weave it into their customer journeys. They don't actually support their customers in making a shift in behavior. So when you start to move away from telling into how can I help you? Like, what's the environment and context that you're in? What do you not know what to do? How can I make it easy for you? That really helps combat those greenwashing claims, because you're seen very clearly to be walking the talk. And I'll talk a little bit more about brands who are doing that later. The other thing is brand loyalty. As I said before, 88% of consumers want people to help them. They get quite cross when you're working with, when you've bought something that it's very difficult to repair it. It's very difficult to return it. It comes packaged in loads of stuff that's not recyclable. People don't like to feel bad about the purchasing that they're making. So on the one side, they're asking for help. And if you give them that help, you'll drive brand loyalty, you'll drive brand engagement. The other thing is people will feel good about purchasing things from you versus a competitor. So it's a good differentiator. The other thing is that consumers are starting to step away from brands that make them feel just a little bit grubby. You feel just a little bit guilty about that particular purchase that you've made. So that brand loyalty and engagement thing is really big. And the last one is avoiding risk. So compliance is biting, regulation is biting. Pepsi was sued by New York for littering, which is obviously something that the consumers are doing, not Pepsi. So there's a risk there. And there's regulations coming in across Europe in terms of microplastics if they're found in the water systems. there will be a penalty there as well. So increasingly, you are, as a brand, responsible for what your consumer does with their product, and therefore there is a risk there. So those are the kind of business benefits. Some are opportunities and some are risks best avoided, but those are the kind of arguments and discussions which really help kind of bump this up the priority list. So now we get into what brands are doing. So brands have worked in this space for a long time, predominantly around telling people. So Persil, Turned Down to 30, that was a 5-year campaign run on TVCs and packaging, just telling people to do something. You know, Henkel does a big, has a big website that's all about reducing your water consumption. There are many examples, please, of brands who are telling people to do, recycle this, return this, etc., etc. But as we know from being told a number of things, the gap between being told to do something and actually doing it, even when you know it's the right thing to do, even when you know it's the healthy thing to do, is not something that humans are very good at. There is a very big say, do, action, inaction gap. And it's even bigger when it comes to sustainability. Reports have shown it's about 50% of our sustainable intentions do not turn into action. And then there's the bigger piece of which is the action that I can do that is actually going to have the biggest impact when it comes to my carbon footprint. So that say do gap, that green gap, is a really big factor. And what we're seeing is increasingly brands are stepping into that gap and saying, we're going to help you by designing experiences which support your behavior change. And on the whole, the ones that I've seen who are leaning into this space are doing it in a very, very intensive way. So 3 examples I want to share. The first is IKEA, who runs something called Live Lagoon, which was a 3-year initiative that they did with 1,500 people, in which they had a mixture of individual coaching, community coaching, and a website. And the focus was around helping people live more sustainably. Part of that was obviously the IKEA products and services, but a lot of it was around behavioral support. At the end of the 3 years, 100% of people were living more sustainably. But when you start to think about the ROI of a campaign like that, that's something that many, many brands cannot get involved in. And also, they're very difficult things to then scale and grow. Similarly with BT, who did a 3-month Smarter Living Challenge with 60 different families. And they went in and they assessed, it was mainly, unsurprisingly, around energy. And it was sort of like, what's your energy consumption at the moment? And then there was half of the recommendations were tech and half of them were behavioral, and they were supported through that 3-month period. And 75% of people continued their behaviors afterwards. But these are very, very heavy campaigns. They take a lot of budget and they take a lot of management and they take a lot of effort. And the number of people they reach is relatively small. So for me, that's when digital is a really fantastic, and as I've seen in this space, a very underexploited tool. Digital has been very effective in shifting all of our behavior in a myriad of different ways, sometimes good, sometimes not quite so good. I won't, we've got Instagram, which has shifted our shopping behavior. We've got Amazon, who's done the same. We've got Uber, we've got fitness apps, all of these things that work really well. They're ubiquitous. Everybody's got a phone. Everyone's got a smartphone pretty much now. It's cheap, it's scalable, and more importantly, when it comes to shifting behavior, the key ways to shift behavior is to make it easy, add pressure, whether that's social pressure, social norms, leaderboards, have you done it, will you do it? And the third one is about right time, right place. And how hard is that to do when you're using traditional media? And how easy is that to do when you're using digital? So part of the reason for Halo by Design is very much about, like, how can we leverage this tool to help those brands take these amazingly rich initiatives and really expand them out there? So here are some great examples of clients who have done it really well, brands who have done it really well. So the first would be REI. Put your hand up if you've heard of their campaign, Opt Outside. Okay, that's great. That's great only because none of you have heard about it. So hopefully it's interesting for you guys to look into it. So they have been running for 7 years now on Black Friday, a campaign called Opt Outside. They give all of their staff the day off work. They shut all of their stores and they drive everyone to spend the day outside. Originally, this was just around employees and shops, but now they've taken it online, on digital, and they advertise, promote it widely. They link people through in different locations to a website so that they can find out where to go and what to do. And actually, the national parks are all starting to get on board with it as well and run their own campaigns. So, and then obviously there's a social sharing element in terms of if you do opt outside, tag and share. And as a result of that, 1.4 million people have opted outside and not shopped on Black Friday. So REI is a great example of an integrated campaign that has been run over a long period of time that is focused very much on a specific intervention, which is do not be part of Black Friday. An example of a not so great campaign is Oblivia Coal Mine. So did any of you guys see that? I can see, Louise, you're laughing, so I'm assuming that you did. It was a great, I mean, like a great bit of creative. It was Olivia Colman, and she is dressed up as an oil exec, looking fabulous. And basically it's underlining, Zach, your point about like pensions money going into oil companies and what oil companies are doing. It was all over LinkedIn. It was in the news, it was everywhere. But when you actually went to the video on YouTube, there was no call to action. And shifting your pensions, and Zach, you can talk more about this, I'd imagine, than I can, till the cows come home, is really hard. It's quite hard for the average consumer to even know, or citizen to even know where to start. And Make My Money Matter, who did the campaign, had all of those assets, but they didn't link it to the video. So if you open the video, there was a link in the YouTube notes, which nobody ever reads other than obviously me in this case. You cut and paste it, you put it in the, it wasn't even clickable, in the URL, you go somewhere and it's taken to the same video again. It's just that journey planning. And eventually after 5 clicks, you get to a page where you can actually take an action. And those are the types of things which are, digital is so fantastic in making it easy for people to do something. And so often, because we're so stuck in the telling, we're not using digital to leverage to the do. So that's campaign examples, customer journey examples, loads of them, those lovely nudges that you layer through existing digital journeys. Skyscanner has got a great one. When you book a flight, there's a little leaf. If it's a sustainable flight, if it isn't there. And just through that little thing, they've booked 159 million sustainable flights versus the alternative. Or it might be layered through a customer journey. So we worked with a carbon calculator called Scone, and you download the calculator if you wanted to reduce your footprint, and they were really struggling to get people to change their transport behavior. Waste, yes, energy, yes, but transport was really hard. And we did exactly what we talked about to the consumers. We understood what their kind of behavioral intentions was, and we just layered nudges into the journey. And we reduced by 37% the carbon footprint related to transport during that trial. So it's not massive new propositions. I'm not talking about those. I'm just talking about looking at what you've got and layering digital on top to make it easier for consumers to shift their behavior. And the last one is when you actually look at defining an entirely new service to shift quite often an ingrained behavior that's hard to tackle. So Hellman's did that with Hellman's Hacks, where they came up with a whole website all designed around like, what will you do with your food waste? Like, how can you use these 5 things to create something new and something different? And of the people who used the site, they reduced food waste by 33% during that trial, which was in Canada. A lot of those spaces, those challenges are in the employee space. For example, judges use an awful lot of paper, and they are one of the major contributors to that within the litigation, industry. So it might be very specific to someone like that, or employees in a kitchen are across every restaurateur or bar manager I've spoken to, they all say that actual waste separation in the kitchen doesn't really happen. So specific digital experiences to shift particularly ingrained tricky behavior. So whilst I am talking to my clients about how you can use digital to shift behavior, the important thing to note is that digital does have its own carbon footprint. And this is an area that is widely unknown. So about 3.7% of global emissions are down to digital, and about 40% of that is our usage of digital. So it's not the items itself, it's not the infrastructure that supports it, it's us and what we do with our digital devices. And a big part of that is apps and websites. and voice assistants and all these other digital experiences that we create, which just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger as people make richer and richer experiences. And this is an area that most people are unaware of. And I recently we assessed 161 B Corp UK websites, and over 50% of them came in the worst 2 categories for the carbon footprint of their site. And I did that because I really wanted to look at my hypothesis that this is unknown and validate that. And the data very much validates it. Only 3% were in the best practice. So I can talk more about that. That's a whole different session all of its own, Anna. But if anyone wants to know about that, because that's a nice, easy scope 3 quick fix, then more than happy to spend a bit more time with anyone on that.
Just thinking on the last point, of course, it was, of course, that's only going to become more extreme with AI. I think it was Elon Musk recently has said that within the next year or two, the primary bottleneck in the development of AI could be availability of sufficient electricity to power it. I'd love to hear a little more about the REI one, because the opt-outside campaign is almost sort of public interest marketing. And some of the biggest difference that you can ever make on sustainability is actually cutting stuff out, going and doing something instead of consuming. So what just a little bit more about how that worked for REI.
So yeah, I think you raise a really good point. And I think what I found quite frustrating as well in the time that I've been working in this space is how few brands leaned into that space. And it tends to be founder-owned brands and ones where the founder has a very strong value around sustainability. So Patagonia is a great example of that. And I think there's a lot of the brands who work in the outdoor space who are in that space because they're like, we've got to protect the world, that we're actually, selling products to get people out into it. So REI were really early. I think they started these campaigns in 2015. And they started very small in terms of just shutting their stores and paying their employees to go outside. And there are, I think, more brands who are going into this space of boycotting Black Friday, perhaps not to the extent of shutting their wares, but to the extent of not running any kind of campaigns or initiatives around that space. So it is catching on. It's just a little bit later than REI were doing it. And then I think, to your point, once they'd started doing it and listed this website and got everybody up and running in terms of like, so you want to go outside, fab, let's help you take the next step. Where do you live? Where would be good to go? Is there anyone else going there too? Then I think it took on that momentum that you're talking about, because then the national park started picking it up as well. Because they were like, great, this is a big brand who's supporting driving people to our location. So let's us start promoting it too. And then it's got that lovely kind of social build that happens in terms of it's not only the brand, but it's also partners to the brand. And it's also consumers themselves, because citizens themselves, they want to go with someone else, and then they want to share what they're doing afterwards as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the challenges for a lot of businesses is that historically businesses have quite a narrow view of the world. They're producing one type of widget, and so that's a very, very specific dimension of life. And of course, there are a lot of businesses, some of the older business, the Unilevers, the Cadburys and so on, that were sort of rooted originally in a more holistic view of how do we create a whole lifestyle for employees and communities. And so it was interesting that the Opt Outside campaign began with staff and then with something that got rolled out. And also interesting that it then took off through partnerships where you have multiple organizations who collectively have a broader take on life. And one thing I wanted to ask a little bit about is, where is this about small changes and where is it about big changes? Because in terms of small changes, I mean, we've heard a lot in the first year about atomic habits and habit stacking, and if you can build on the little things that you're doing. And also you talk about digital and the ability to be in the right time and place for people, to just sort of nudge them making from a default position to making an alternative to that default position just a little bit easier. On the other hand, sometimes we need more ambitious change. One of our other members, John Grant, did some research some time ago with the Department for Transport, and they found unexpectedly that people were not willing to make small changes that the department thought would be easy, like driving a bit more slowly and steadily, because it actually takes quite a lot of cognitive load to change your driving style. On the other hand, they were quite willing to do things like car sharing and alternative methods of travel that the department officials had thought would be quite a big ask. And we did a session on this say-do gap for Gen Z a few months ago. And the finding from the research was that, you know, Gen Z were actually not that great in taking ethical consumption decisions. But my sense was that you know, for somebody who's, you know, just emerging into the workplace, individual supermarket decisions at the supermarket are going to be overshadowed by what kind of a career am I going to have? And that actually maybe they just didn't have the cognitive availability to focus on some of the small stuff, when big questions like, am I going to have a career that is going to mean something useful to the world for the next 15 years is actually what's impinging. So where do we need to think short is small, and where do we need to think more ambitious?
Wow, Paul, that's a big question. I think I have a couple of different things to pick out of that. I think the first one is those small changes are really important, because it starts the momentum growing. And back to your point about REI and the employees, that's why employee engagement is such an interesting space to start in. Because if you can create an environment and foster a shift around something really potentially quite small, around the food that you eat, or, you know, supporting through a bike to work scheme or those types of things, a couple of things happens. Number one, you tend to port that behavior from work to home. The other thing is that you're showing people in your environment around you that you're doing something different, which creates social norms and social pressure for them to pick it up. And, you know, the brilliant thing about that is that you are actually kind of creating a supported environment within the employee environment to teach and learn and push them in that direction. So that's part of the reason why my company is called Halo by Design, because it's got that halo effect. It kind of ripples out. The second thing is that behavioral psychology has shown that even if people are forced to behave in a particular way, it creates momentum. It creates like a cognitive bias. It's like, I did this, therefore I care. And then they look for other things. So it's like that, you know, when you're looking at a ladder in a playground and the bottom step is really high, so that your, you know, 5-year-old has got to get high enough to be able to get their leg over it. And then they're all the normal size. It's like that first action, even if it's really small, gets you to the top of that first rung. And that's why I really want brands to kind of engage in that way and spend their money to really help people take that first step. I think the other thing about what you said is, like, clearly people are irrational. We are extremely irrational, and we're very influenced by the context that we're in, the mood that we're in, the tools that we have available at any one time. And this project I'm doing at the moment, you know, it's a lot of what we do is about hypothesis testing. And when I think back to how clients used to set up innovation centers, I'm sure you all remember this, when everybody had an innovation center, so, you know, with VR glasses and all the other good stuff kind of in it. We need to be doing the same thing around behavior, because there's not a silver bullet. There just isn't. It's like different people at different stages are going to engage with different messages in different ways. And that, again, is why digital is so brilliant, because what we can do is start to learn about how you engage, and we can segment and segment and segment again. And AI could well play a really important role in that. It's a force for good and a force for not so good. So it's about, like, how do we understand, how do we test as much as we can so that we can do the best job that we possibly can. I never go in telling a client that I can definitely change people's behavior, because that's, you know, it's like, what can we do? Where can we experiment? What can we learn from what we're doing? this group in this context, what do they care about, will be very different from the same group in a different context. So many of the challenges are category level challenges. They're not individual to individual brands. If you want to shift people, and if you just look at the FMCG space, it's refill, return, recycle, you know, those are the same things that Unilever are focusing on, Henkel is focusing on, etc., etc. And back to the point that Paul made, or we were talking about, is how do you test as many things as you possibly can? That becomes much easier if you've got a common goal and you're all putting budget and effort and resource into the same area. There's an awful lot of collaboration that happens around supply chain or around sort of areas like that. That's not that much that I'm seeing around behavior. Very happy to be told about any others that you guys know about. The only one that I really know about is the train line, running a collective mission about trying to shift people away from flights and onto trains. And they recently ran an event which was attended by you know, all the different great and good, running all the various different networks around the UK to come together to try to work out how they can actually start to shift people away from planes to trains. And what I love about that is they're very pragmatic. They're like, we're not going to fix all the problems with the trains in the UK. That's not going to happen. But what can we work? How can we work with what we have to work together to shift people in this direction? I would love to see, Nikki, so much more of that, because I think it really slows down momentum, that I'm solving the same problems for clients in silos. And a big part of what I try and encourage my clients to do is share. And the great thing about working in the sustainability space is most of the clients that I work with are really happy to do so, assuming legal is okay with it, because fundamentally they're doing their job because they really, really want to make a difference. We all realize that we can only do that if we don't hide these nuggets under bushels, but actually share them more widely.
So wonderful to see you all. And thank you so much, Tam. And yeah, we'll see you hopefully next week.